It's midnight over the Sahara Desert, 1988. Two MH-47D Chinooks cut across the dark horizon, their nearly 60-foot rotors slicing through the dry air. On board are the elite Night Stalkers, the only pilots who could pull this mission off. The target comes into view, an Mi-25 Hind gunship. One of the most feared Soviet war machines lies pilotless on an airstrip. The Chinooks bank into position, their guns pointed at the aircraft below. But they're not here to destroy it. They're here to steal it. The clock is ticking. Special agents secure the 18,000-pound Soviet chopper to a slung load and give the green light. Engines fire up. Cables tighten. One of the Chinooks lifts the gunship into the sky. Suddenly, a blinding sandstorm overtakes them. The gunship below sways violently, threatening to drag the Chinook from the sky. The desert is striking back. Looking for a hero. When the United States entered World War II, President Franklin D. Roosevelt knew that for the nation to win the war, it would need to conquer the skies first. However, Hitler's Luftwaffe and the kamikaze pilots of Hirohito weren't the sort of enemy that would make this any easier. At the time, Germany had some of the most advanced aerial technology in the world, while Japanese pilots were willing to give their lives if necessary, just to bring American aircraft down. However, as the war progressed, so did America's determination. Assembly lines worked day and night, giving birth to fleets of warbirds at a rate that made the Axis leaders shake to their cores. By 1945, the skies belonged to the United States. The Republic P-47 Thunderbolt shredded enemy columns on land and sea with its 850 caliber machine guns. The Grumman F-6F Hellcat, a carrier-based Predator, racked up over 5,000 air-to-air victories, leading the U.S. Navy to dominate the Pacific theater. And then came the Boeing B-29 Superfortress, a flying fortress that rained destruction from altitudes no enemy could reach, culminating in the atomic strikes that forced Japan to its knees. By war's end, there wasn't a battlefield on Earth that American air power couldn't dominate. However, as Cold War tensions flared, a new enemy emerged. Vietnam was split into two, a communist North, backed by the Soviet Union, and a pro-Western South, supported by the United States. But unlike Germany, where Cold War lines froze into a stalemate, by the mid-1950s, bullets were already flying over the Asian nation. In Washington, President Dwight D. Eisenhower feared that the fall of Vietnam could spark a regional collapse, toppling neighboring countries like dominoes into communist hands. Full-scale war wasn't on the table, not yet, but Eisenhower knew the call was coming. And when it came, America would need more than courage. But Vietnam was like nothing the United States had ever faced. There were no front lines, no uniforms, no clear enemy. Instead, American troops would find themselves stalked by shadows, ambushed by civilians, and fighting enemies who seemed to vanish amid the canopy. In a war like that, not even the mightiest aircraft from World War II could promise victory. The U.S. needed something new, something built for this chaotic terrain, the tight jungle clearings, the mountain outposts, and the wet, hostile landscapes where runways didn't exist. They needed an aircraft that could lift, deliver, extract, and protect, all at once, and under fire. The strongest warbird. The Vertol Corporation rose to the challenge. For years, this renegade design firm had carved out a reputation for shattering conventions with unusual aircraft designs. Among their most notable creations was the Piasecki HRP Rescuer, a helicopter that ditched the standard tail rotor and instead incorporated twin counter-rotating rotors, one at the front and one at the rear, allowing every ounce of engine power to be used for lift and mobility. To keep the rotors from shredding each other in mid-air, engineers gave the aircraft an upward arching fuselage, resulting in an odd silhouette that earned the aircraft the nickname the Flying Banana. The helicopter looked wrong, but once it lifted off, it flew steadier than anything in its class. Vertol had rewritten the helicopter playbook, and the U.S. military was paying attention. With Vietnam on the horizon, the Pentagon agreed that Vertol was the one to build their next warbird. But what that helicopter was supposed to be sparked heated debate. Some military brass wanted a nimble assault craft for rapid strikes and troop drops. Others envisioned a flying fortress that could haul artillery, supplies, and vehicles deep into the jungle. This back and forth resulted in the YHC-1A prototype, a creation that was simply too in the middle, It was neither fast enough for combat insertions, nor strong enough for heavy hauling. It was then that American officials understood they would need to go big or go home. Vertol then came up with the HC-1B, a sky giant stretching nearly 50 feet from nose to tail, and extending to almost 100 feet with its twin rotors. This beast shattered expectations with its power to haul over 15,000 pounds of cargo deep into enemy territory and ferry up to 55 fully armed soldiers straight into the fight. By 1962, the aircraft, now redesignated the CH-47A Chinook in honor of the Native American tribe from the state of Washington, entered service with the U.S. Army. The final model possessed twin Lycoming turboshaft engines on both sides of the fuselage, delivering 2,200 horsepower and allowing the helicopter to move at nearly 200 miles per hour, while delivering equipment and ammunition to American troops stationed in harsh terrains. No other helicopter of its time could match that blend of brute strength and battlefield agility. And the aircraft couldn't have come at a better time, as in 1964, after a reported North Vietnamese attack on U.S. naval forces in the Gulf of Tonkin, Congress approved America's formal involvement in Vietnam. The United States was finally going to war, and its brand new CH-47 Chinook was coming along. Over the jungle. In 1965, the skies above the Vietnamese jungle came alive with the roar of American engines. The Viet Cong, hidden in their labyrinthine passageways, could only look up as the sky darkened with the mechanical herds of U.S. fighters, bombers, and reconnaissance birds circling above their bases. Among this skyborne armada were 3 CH-47 Chinook companies from the 1st Cavalry Division. Vietnam was not a battlefield that could be easily conquered, not even with some of the most advanced helicopters in the entire world. Here, no landing zone was ever truly secure. It didn't matter if the Chinooks could carry howitzers onto mountaintops. When the helicopters ran into an ambush upon descent, their power became meaningless. In order to survive, Chinook pilots needed firepower. The CH-47 was never intended for direct combat, and crews were forced to get creative. Americans began bolting M60 machine guns to the side doors and mounting M2 50 caliber cannons in the rear cargo bay. Stationed in these positions, gunners stood ready, eyes scanning the jungle for any flicker of movement below, prepared to rip through the undergrowth with streams of hot lead. Metamorphosis. However, in Vietnam, foreign troops were not the only enemy. The country's weather turned every mission into a gamble. Suffocating heat and choking humidity strangled the Chinook's engines, sapping its power and cutting payload capacity, especially at higher altitudes. 7,000 pounds of cargo was the upper limit in the mountains, 8,000 if they were lucky near the coast. And then there were the eager green troops. Dazzled by the Chinook's wide interior, they would load it beyond its limits. Too much weight, and the helicopter bogged down, hovering low and sluggish, making it an easy target for enemy gunners waiting in the treetops for the perfect time to strike. The Chinook needed to evolve. Upgraded engines, like the T-55 L7C turboshafts, gave the Chinook the power to claw through brutal heat, thick monsoon rains, and mountain winds, while new Chinook models kept building on the helicopter's strength. The CH-47C, with its beefed-up engines and reinforced frame, could lift nearly 50,000 pounds, effectively turning it into a sky crane. With these enhancements, the Chinook became one of the most vital aircraft in Vietnam. They flew search and rescue missions, hauling out not just wounded soldiers, but downed aircraft, plucking them from enemy territory, slinging them beneath their bellies, and bringing them back to the fight. As for firepower, it didn't take long before the introduction of the ACH-47A gunships, nicknamed Guns A-Go-Go. These were some of the most lethal Chinooks to ever take off, their cargo doors replaced by armored plating, their frames bristling with M24A1 20mm cannons, nose-mounted 40mm grenade launchers, and 50 caliber machine guns flanking their sides. Even their exteriors sported pods of 70mm rockets, ready to fight their way into the jungle and back out again. Over 750 Chinooks carved their way through Vietnam's war-torn skies. About a quarter of them fell, shot down, worn out, or lost to the jungle's grip, but the rest endured. A new battlefront. In the years following Vietnam, the CH-47 Chinook only kept on spreading its wings across the globe. Nations everywhere, watching its performance in the jungles of Southeast Asia, recognized this beast was something extraordinary and sought to add it to their fleets. Throughout the 1970s, Iran snapped up nearly 150 Chinooks. However, the Iranian Revolution erupted in 1979, toppling the Shah and shifting the political landscape of the Middle East. A sweeping weapons embargo blocked the delivery of the last batch of helicopters. But even with the embargo, they kept a respectable fleet of Chinooks ready to carry their soldiers into one of the bloodiest conflicts the region had ever seen. In 1982, amid the clashes of the Iran-Iraq War, the Chinook became key during Operation Fath al-Mubin, set to trap and break the Iraqi forces stationed at the front lines in the Khuzestan province. Iranian commandos boarded Chinooks under the cover of darkness and crossed into Iraqi territory undetected, gliding beneath radar and ghosting through the landscape. Then the ambush began. The Chinooks touched down, dropping Iranian troops right next to Iraqi artillery positions. Using surprise and speed as weapons, the soldiers overran enemy headquarters, leaving Iraqi forces in disarray. By the time Baghdad realized what had hit them, the damage was done, and Iran had won the battle. Iran wasn't alone in unleashing the Chinook's fury. Libya used them to ferry troops and supplies during its conflict with Chad, carving through desert winds as soldiers stormed remote battlefields. Thousands of miles away, in the cold reaches of the Falkland Islands, Argentina deployed Chinooks to transport troops across rough terrain in their desperate fight against British forces. The Chinook wasn't showing any signs of slowing down, and soon it would prove just how far it could go. The Night Stalkers. In 1988, the dust was settling over the battlegrounds of Chad and Libya after their long-standing conflict had finally cooled. However, in the chaos of retreat, Libyan forces abandoned something priceless at the Wadi Doum airbase in northern Chad: Soviet-made Mi-25 Hind gunships, some of the USSR's most closely guarded aerial weapons. The Soviets, alarmed by what they'd left behind, ordered Libya to bomb the wreckage and turn the bases to the ground, do whatever it took to prevent these gunships from falling into enemy hands. But despite the airstrikes that rained down in the desert, one Mi-25 remained untouched, waiting to be claimed. For the United States, this was too good to pass up, a chance to snatch one of Moscow's fiercest aircraft from right under their noses. In quiet negotiations with Chad's government, a covert mission was greenlit. The Americans would sneak into the desert, grab the Hind, and get out before the Libyans or the Soviets caught wind of it. The risk was enormous. If they delayed even a moment too long, the enemy could swoop in and flatten the airfield before American boots ever touched down. To pull it off, there was only one team the Pentagon could trust: the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment, the Night Stalkers, and their aircraft of choice was the CH-47 Chinook. As the mission countdown began, the Night Stalkers trained daily. Over the sands of New Mexico, they flew night drills, slinging 6 500-gallon water drums beneath their Chinooks to mimic the 18,000-pound load of the Soviet Hind. Then, on May 21st, 2 disassembled Chinooks were packed into a C-5 Galaxy, bound for N'Djamena International Airport in Chad. Crews rushed to assemble the CH-47s on the tarmac, prepping them for the 550-mile trek across the desert. But the clock was ticking. Intelligence reports warned that Libyan forces were prowling nearby, and if the operation was discovered, the mission would be over before the Chinooks could even take off. With no time to lose, the Night Stalkers lifted off just past midnight. They skirted low over the sand, refueling at prearranged waypoints across the desert, racing the dawn. At Wadi Doum, the Hind lay in wait, partially disassembled by Allied ground crews. The Chinooks dropped in silently, their twin rotors kicking up storms of sand as they hovered into position. Carefully, they lashed the heavy gunship beneath them, splitting the weight between both helicopters. So far, flawless. But before the Chinooks could get back to base, a sandstorm rolled in across the desert. Visibility dropped to near zero, their instruments straining to stay locked on course. The suspended Mi-25 began to buck wildly beneath them, swinging like a wrecking ball, threatening to hit the helicopters that were transporting it. To survive, the Night Stalkers had to throttle back to a crawl, just 50 miles per hour, fighting the storm inch by inch. For over an hour, they battled through the choking dust, holding steady while the gunship thrashed and twisted beneath them. Finally, through the wall of sand, the lights of the base flickered into view. The Chinooks touched down, the captured Mi-24 still swinging beneath their frames. Without wasting a second, they loaded the prize back onto the C-5 Galaxy, lifting off before the Libyans or Soviets ever knew what happened. Mid-century trial. In 2011, 50 years after the CH-47 took its maiden flight, a duo of Chinooks was tasked with one of the most secretive operations in modern military history, Operation Neptune Spear, the mission to eliminate Osama bin Laden. To this day, the full details remain classified, but what has surfaced reveals that the assault force deployed 3 specialized Blackhawks and 2 Chinooks, each modified to pierce deep into enemy territory without a whisper. Military analysts speculate that these Chinooks could have had their rotor blades reshaped, swept back, or forged from advanced materials designed to reduce noise during flight. It's also possible that these unique Chinooks employed infrared suppressors to mask their heat signatures, rendering them near invisible to heat-seeking weapons. Engine cooling systems may have been used to bleed off the heat glow of turbine exhaust, while radar jammers could be implemented to blind the enemy. Chief Warrant Officer 5, Douglas England, one of the pilots aboard one of the modified Chinooks that night, has revealed that within minutes of breaching bin Laden's Abbottabad compound, one of the stealth Blackhawks crash-landed inside the high walls. The decision was immediate. The downed aircraft had to be destroyed. Before England could even land, the blast rocked the compound, a mushroom cloud rising around the incoming American troops and forcing him to circle and land beneath it, close enough to feel the heat of the explosion. Though details about England's Chinook remain concealed, the crash and subsequent detonation suggest his helicopter may have been armed with advanced defensive systems set to fend off enemies and take out downed American planes if needed. These modifications could have perhaps even taken inspiration from the former ACH-47A Guns-A-Go-Go gunships of the Vietnam War. Once the SEAL soldiers deployed by the American aircraft secured their target, England and his team began the speedy exfiltration from the compound. However, the enemies they had left behind would not make their escape easy. Before England and his men could get too far, a Pakistani F-16 fighter jet gave chase. Despite the fighter's ability to go as fast as 1,353 miles per hour, England was able to get his helicopter back to base without so much as a scratch. Whichever way the pilot accomplished this remains up for debate. But clues he has given reveal that his Chinook was likely equipped with advanced special defensive capabilities that allowed it to neutralize the enemy's offensive capabilities. England has only stated, quote, "It was an electronic fight. A missile never left the rail, so I was able to evade him electronically. That's all I'll say." An operation unlike any other. Still riding high from the successful raid that eliminated al-Qaeda's leader, the United States once again called upon the power of the CH-47 Chinook just months later for another high-stakes mission. This time, the target was one of the Taliban's most crucial commanders, Qari Tahir, an evasive trooper orchestrating insurgent attacks from deep within Afghanistan's Tangi Valley. The operation unfolded late at night on August 5, 2011. The moonless sky offered no visual aid for pilots as 2 Apache attack helicopters, an AC-130 gunship, and a fleet of surveillance aircraft encircled the valley. The Tangi Valley was a nightmare for any pilot, a narrow choke point with only one route in or out, surrounded by steep ridges and enemy lookouts. Below the aircraft, a platoon of U.S. Army Rangers crept toward a fortified compound where Tahir was believed to be hiding. As the Rangers closed in, one of the Apaches lit up a squad of Taliban fighters spotted moving near the compound. The firefight erupted just as the Rangers opened fire on the ground, fighting tooth and nail to seize control of the base. It would take hours of battle before the area was finally secured. However, as the Americans went through the casualties, there was no sign of Qari Tahir. He had escaped. Having anticipated this move, the Americans had sent out Extortion 17, a CH-47 Chinook loaded with 30 servicemen, among them Navy SEALs, Air Force combat controllers, pararescuemen, Army aircrew, National Guard pilots, and Afghan allies ready to cut off any fleeing insurgents. As Extortion 17 approached its landing zone at a cautious 60 miles per hour, the crew scanned the darkness for threats, but nothing stirred. They were unable to see that, hidden in the shadows, a Taliban team awaited them. As the Chinook descended, they fired a volley of rocket-propelled grenades. One RPG flew across the air, and exploded just above the helicopter's rear rotor, shearing off 10 feet of blade in an instant. The Chinook lurched violently. The pilots fought to regain control, wrestling with the bucking aircraft as it spiraled down, but the damage was too severe. Within seconds, Extortion 17 smashed into the earth. Backup forces rushed to secure the crash site, keeping Taliban fighters at bay, but it was too late. The impact left no survivors. In the days that followed, American forces hunted down Qari Tahir and the insurgents responsible for the ambush. Both the Taliban commander and the RPG team that brought down the Chinook were neutralized in swift retaliatory strikes, but the damage had already been done. The attack on Extortion 17 would become the deadliest single incident for U.S. forces during the war in Afghanistan. Flying ahead. As the Chinook celebrated its 60th birthday in 2021, Patrick Servaas, a Boeing spokesperson, declared, quote, "There's no doubt in my mind that Chinook will be at least a 100-year-old aircraft. It'll be operating and performing for the United States and its allies well beyond 2060. This ambitious projection is backed by the constant reinvention of the Chinook. With every new generation, the helicopter just keeps on getting stronger. Its engines now are capable of reaching 5,000 horsepower, more than double the muscle of the original 2200 that powered it through the jungles of Southeast Asia. Upgrades in the works promise upcoming models with reinforced airframes and enhanced drivetrains, making this bird capable of hauling an extra 4,000 pounds of payload, be it artillery, troops, or even other aircraft, across the most hostile battlefields on Earth.